And today I had planned to do a video on patriarchy, but there was an amazing media drop information on the Jeb Bush campaign. And since it's Friday and I do politics on Friday too, I thought I would do this instead and then do the patriarchy video tomorrow. So the thing that I'm going to go over is a document that was leaked to the press. I think it was US News and World Report. We'll see in a second when I switch the screens. And it was a 112 slide presentation that the Bush campaign had given to its donors. And this is very exciting for me. This is like finding a 500-pound, a euro note or something on the ground. It's like Christmas, because the only other people who have seen this information had to pay, I don't know, anywhere between 50, 150, 250 million dollars to see it. And so it's a really great insight into Bush world and how they're thinking and how they are trying to keep their donors from fleeing. I say donors, but they also call them investors. Like they're going to get a return, I guess, in terms of tax breaks and policy preference. They're investing in Bush so they can get a return later on. But these are the people who are panicking, and these are the people for whom the presentation was made. Before I switch over, I've got the presentation on the computer. I'm going to switch over to a screenshot where you are sharing our screen so that you can see the PowerPoint, and I'll walk through the PowerPoint. I'm not necessarily going to go through all 112 slides because some of them are media files and aren't relevant, but there's enough in there to really give you a sense, at least I think so, of what's going on in Bush world. And before I start that, I guess it's worth pointing out that yes, I'm a political behavioralist. I have my degree in political behavior, and I find these things really interesting. The way that I approach this is going to be different from the story that the Bush people are telling. So I'm going to try as much as I can to denote in my talk where I'm giving my opinion versus where I'm trying to interpret what I think the Jeb Bush people were pitching to their audience. So from my side of it, let's go over the 4 M's of campaigning. If you've watched my videos, you know this already. If you're new to my videos, this is important. The way that I look at the health of a campaign is to evaluate it on the 4 M's: money, machinery, momentum, and message. Given those 4 M's, money, Bush's super PAC is doing okay, but he's not really doing very well in terms of his hard money. Campaign donations that keep his office going, that keep his campaign funded rather than his super PAC. Machinery. That is the one thing that Bush does have going for him. He's got enough money to build up a national machinery. What was momentum? These aren't like fixed into, like a list. So momentum, Bush has no momentum. He has absolutely no. He's got no momentum. He's going in the wrong direction. He's going down, not up. And message. He does not have a winning message. So even though he's got money and machinery, he does not have the momentum or the message to carry him further at this point. So today is Friday. The Republican debate was this week. Bush did terribly in the 3rd debate, really underperformed. And there is now, I think it's pretty well concluded, there's a stench of death that's surrounding his campaign. It is really in a very, very bad situation. Now, how much of that is real and how much of that is perception? In politics, perception sometimes matters more than reality. And if everyone is creating the narrative that Jeb is done, it's going to be very difficult for him to get control of his own narrative again and change the direction of it. So those are the things that I'm going to be looking for in these slides. And you'll notice, and what I found when I looked at them, is that the slides themselves focus a lot on money and a lot of on machinery. And it's very weak in terms of messaging, and I think it's rather deceptive in terms of polling. So those are the 4 things I'm going to be looking for. And in terms of the way that I see the race very differently from the Jeb Bush people. I see basically, I've said this before, this is the first 21st century race, in my opinion. We thought that Barack Obama did it with the micro-targeting and the outreach and the database, but really, for the Republicans, this is their 21st century campaign, and it involves a lot of social media, a lot of just hate and ignorance and lies and misrepresentation of the truth. There is no real substantive policy being discussed. It has a lot to do with personalities. It's a mess. the Republican race is a mess, and the candidates are mutinying. They're having a meeting over the weekend to try to take control of the debates back from the RNC. So, you know, for me as a Democrat, oh my God, this is just, wow. I'm running out of popcorn, to be honest. So that's how I see the race. I see the race as a fundamental shift from last time, the last two races. I see that the voters are now in a very different place from the establishment. They're like in a very, very different place from the establishment. And the establishment really hasn't cottoned on to this yet. And we'll see, I think, this rather delusional worldview that still pervades Bushland in the slides as well. So I've talked enough about the slides. Again, I think that there's a real big division in the party, that Jeb Bush's people are ignoring, that Trump is not going away, Carson's not going away, insofar as their voters are hungry for someone like them, and they want someone like that to vote for. And that is the problem the establishment is having. That being said, let's go ahead and swap this over to the actual information that was released. So let me just get this slide here ready and go full screen. Yep, that's the one. Okay. I'm already on page 40. I was reading ahead while I was waiting. There's some construction going on next door, and they were doing a lot of banging. So I was looking through one last time before starting this. Okay, so I'm going to go into screen share now. And I'm going to, which one? Entire screen. I think that's the one I want. Share. Okay, so send to everybody. Should be presenting to everybody now. So Hangouts is sharing your screen with Google+. All right, well, either this is going to be a really boring talk because the screen's not going to change, or you can see stuff. On the assumption this is working, I'm going to go ahead and start. So this is just the third quarter mission for 2016 campaign briefing that was leaked to US World News Report. I will put links in the description box below. You can go read the article, but the article doesn't go into this much stuff. So this is what they presented in terms of the state of the race. What Jeb's telling his funders is that the press is obsessed with process as opposed to substance. They're obsessed with the horse race rather than the candidates. And I disagree with that, but I'll go through this afterwards. They say that the race are going to be fluid for some time because voters have ADD, which tells you a little bit about how they view the Republican base, that they don't have very much regard for their ability to make up their mind. Now, one might say that, yeah, there are voters who decide late. I think that there's definitely voters who decide late, but voters having ADD as a blanket statement is frankly wrong and insulting and shows the delusion, I think, in Bush world. Their third point was fundamentals matter, cash matters is fourth, and then discipline matters is fifth. So that was their opening slide. Now they're trying to sell the story that the press is obsessed with the process, but that's not going to have an impact on the outcome. And you'll notice that all of these screen grabs from Politico and other newspapers are all before Trump got into the race. And they're trying to make this case that what is happening in the media right now, people shouldn't pay attention to. But the problem is that what is happening in the race right now is the race. It's not like the race is going to start in January. The race already started. And so this idea that somehow what's going on now isn't going to impact them in February, they might not even make it to February at this point, the Jeb campaign. Now this information is coming from, it's called Target Point Consulting, and it's conducted in September. Just gonna let me hide this, yes. So you can see at the bottom of the screen, they're always going to have their information. Well, oftentimes they put their source. And this is auto dial phone interviews with likely GOP voters. All right, here's a problem with doing nationwide. Nationwide, people aren't going to vote for the primary candidates. That's Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. So why wouldn't they put this information in for those primary states? Because those primary states people, those are actually people who are deciding earlier. And so by putting this slide up, it looks like for Jeb that he actually has a chance nationally. But the fact is that he has to win in Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina. He has to win somewhere before he can go nationwide. So I think this slide is rather deceptive because it's presenting a national picture without focusing on the state picture. Now, another narrative that the Bush people try to sell is this idea that what is happening now won't matter later on, because in 2004, Wesley Clark was up, in 2008, Hillary Clinton, blah, blah, blah. I have a whole video on why 2016 is not like 2012 and the comparisons aren't worth making. And fundamentally, the core of that is the base has shifted away from trusting or being willing to kind of work with the establishment, and they have two insanely crazy red meat kind of candidates to vote for. So they have options that they didn't have in previous cycles, and that's why you can't compare 2012 and 2016. So this slide is the Jeb Bush people deluding themselves, in my opinion, and deluding their donors. I don't know why anyone would buy this, given the structures that you can see just by comparing the years. Now, this is his machinery slide, grassroots efforts, and he talks about how many state offices he has. Well, we all know that his overspending has gotten him in trouble. He's contacting voters, and he has endorsements from more establishment types. Again, this is the 20th century campaign style. You raise a ton of money, you get all your friends in Congress to back you, and then it looks like you're inevitable. That inevitability was, I think, Jeb's strategy all along. Now that he actually has to run as a candidate, he's terrible and he's losing because he can't compete in a 21st century campaign structure. They're still playing, I think, by 20th century campaign rules instead of fighting this war, this digital war. Again, a focus on cash, and they're comparing here Jeb and Rubio and then McCain and Romney from the previous cycles. You'll see there that the burn rate for both of them, Jeb's burn rate is right up there, not that far behind Marco Rubio's, and Marco Rubio's is 90%. That's pretty high. You can see that for McCain in the third quarter burn rate, if you go down to the McCain column and go all the way down, it's 105%. That's what kind of got him in trouble, and he had to retool. Cash is fine, but we've seen with Scott Walker, we've seen with Rick Perry, that cash is not destiny. You can't buy the presidency in this cycle. Maybe Mitt Romney could have tried in the last one, but cash doesn't matter if you can't connect to voters. And you'll see very little actual connection with voters, in my opinion, in these slides. Now, this, I think, was a finger-shaking slide. It's about discipline matters and how everybody has to stay on the same page and say very nice things about Jeb to the media. Basically lie. They're saying don't talk about the reality of how he's doing in the polls in the media, because then it just feeds the perception that he's actually going down in the polls in the media. And if we lie to people, it might be easier to delude them. So this, the death spiral quote from the Washington Post on the 23rd of October, I think was people need to shut their mouths slide. I don't know that, but that would be my suspicion based on where it's placed and what it's focused on. Now the next set of slides are going to be, again, pitching this world view that Jeb somehow is going to be successful because of his inevitability or his family name or because of his experience. And none of these things are resonating with voters in the primary states, because they want an outsider, they want someone who's never been in government before, and they want someone who talks about how they feel, not about policy details. So this best candidate, best record, best vision, it kind of doesn't matter in this field. It doesn't matter to the voters in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina right now. This is another symptom of the establishment bubble that the Bush people are in. This whole Hugh Hewitt, George Will. Nobody in the Tea Party base in Iowa is hanging on George Will's every word. This, again, is the disconnect between the Washington types, the lobbying types, and the ordinary people who are voting in the primary states. Now, this information was a Quinnipiac poll that was conducted in middle of September 17th through the 21st. And it's, again, interviewing national registered voters. And this, again, is really problematic because it's not people who nationwide who are going to be voting. It's Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina in the first 3 states. So this information, one, it's almost a month old. Two, it's talking to voters who really aren't going to be asked to make up their mind anytime soon, or aren't being contacted by the campaigns on a regular basis to rope them in. So yeah, it makes Jeb look good, but you're using the worst data to try to do that. And of course, we're not seeing how any of the other candidates are performing. So this, again, I think is just smoke instead of real data. Another nationwide Republican and Republican-leaning registered voters from the middle of September before his disastrous debate performances. The right kind of experience to be president, trustworthy, all of that kind of stuff is probably true, but it doesn't mean that they want him to be president. You can think, yeah, Jeb Bush has the right temperament to handle an international crisis, but I don't want another Bush in the White House. So you can hold both views. Just because you think somebody might be good at their job doesn't mean you're going to vote for them. And again, I know that the Bush people are desperate to get a positive message out, but the fact that it's a national poll and it's so old makes me, again, think that this isn't worth taking into account anymore because things have moved on since September. Now, the next few slides here, they're going to be looking at closer in detail to the primary states. And they're gonna, I don't know what they were trying to sell on this because these numbers are terrible. The Bushes, like got half the supporters, less than half the supporters than Donald Trump or Ben Carson. And he's neck and neck with Marco Rubio. So that's the current, we've got the private polling that the Bush people did in the middle of October, and then they've got some national polls comparing, and you can see that basically that margin of error, which is probably, I would imagine, somewhere between 4 and 6%, shows pretty consistently, pretty stable support for these candidates, at least in the top tier. So moving on. Primary image ratings. I don't know why they put this slide on here because I don't think it makes Jeb look good, right? So they put Jeb on top and they're like, oh, look, Jeb's at 23. Oh, he's really, 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 really positive. But the only person who's lower than him is Donald Trump at 18%. And Marco Rubio is at 41%. Ben Carson's at 48. So this slide does not show to me any strength on Jeb's part. If anything, it shows that he's barely better than Donald Trump in terms of how much Republican voters like him. And we know that Donald Trump is an incredibly polarizing figure, whereas Jeb Bush is kind of a meh figure. More information on primary intentions. I don't know what date this was collected on, but again, he's the same sort of, crappy third place, tied with John Kasich and Marco Rubio, second tier that he was in, we saw in the previous slide. This is so sad. All right, so they're showing here how Jeb did. This is their first campaign ad, and they dumped a bunch of money in September. And for that, they went from like 7% to 14%. Well, he's back down again because the spending created a little lift. Wow, a 2%, not 2%. They increased their support from 7 to 14 within the margin of error in 6 weeks. And how many millions of dollars did it take to get them those extra 7 points? And if they're at 10 and Trump is at 23 and they have to spend how many millions to double their support, there isn't like enough time and money in the world to see all the ads that it would take to make Jeb Bush competitive in New Hampshire, in my opinion. We'll see. They're going to try. So this, again, not a slide of strength, in my opinion, because this is ending at the start of middle of October and his numbers are, I think, sinking again. It's a slide of weakness. Now, instead of taking on Donald Trump and Ben Carson, who between them are sucking up almost or more than half of the base, Jeb his staff spends time in this talk going after other establishment candidates who are in the single digits or barely in the double digits. Why Bush is focusing, I think I know why Bush is focusing on Marco, and that's because they're both from Florida, and he has to win somewhere. And if he can't win in Florida, then he's really dead. There's just no hope if he can't get his home state. So he sees Marco clearly as a threat. I don't see Marco Rubio being quite the threat that the Bush people do because he can't raise money to save his life. At least he hasn't been able to demonstrate that he can raise enough money to actually run the campaign. And I did a bit in the last video about his lagging field organization and his lagging hiring, and the fact that he's very a Washington-based campaign rather than a grassroots campaign. But this, to me, I guess, shows where Bush, instead of dealing with the real threat of Carson and Trump, feels that he should go after Rubio. I guess this is perhaps them thinking that Trump and Carson will still just flounder and drop out, in which case he thinks Marco is going to be his biggest threat. All honesty, if he can't get past New Hampshire, Marco is not his threat. Right now, Jeb Bush's biggest worry is Jeb Bush. He's a terrible candidate. He can't debate. He doesn't connect with people. The focus group results were awful for him, and he's focusing on Marco Rubio's attendance. It just seems to me a little bit of, fiddling while Rome burns. He's not at all focused on the real problems of his campaign, which is with the voters, not with other establishment candidates. And again, he goes on about Rubio has only one endorser, whereas Bush has 11. As people in Iowa are anti-establishment. So all of these sort of endorsements and groups that get behind him, if they're all tied to Washington, if they're all typical politicians, I know that that's the way that you would run the old style campaign. But I don't see primary voters being really, really impressed that top congressional Hispanic Floridian Mario Diaz-Balart and a few other people have endorsed Jeb Bush. I just don't see that really playing when they think the establishment is the problem. Experience matters. Not to Republican primary voters, it doesn't. And again, there's this disconnect between what the Bush people seem to want the voters to be and who the voters really are. And as a teacher, when you get into a classroom, you don't get to teach the students you want, you get to teach the students you have. And that means you have to start with where your students are. And if they don't know some of the basics to get through your course, then you're going to have to identify that and send them off to do the work on the basics and get them to the point where they can do the work. Because just telling them that they're bad and stupid doesn't actually teach them anything. It just makes them feel like crap and they don't engage. So telling his donors that experience matters, yeah, it might matter to them. But if you listen to the voters in Iowa, if you look at the polling in the crosstabs, if you dig down inside those numbers, experience is a hindrance in this campaign, not a benefit. Right, so we're going to get some more polling numbers here. We've seen this number already with Bush was in third, and this was again kind of after, I think, the peak of that advertising buy, because he's dropped at least 3 points, I think, in New Hampshire since here. And again, misfocus, or is that the word I'm looking for? He's focusing on Kasich and Rubio instead of on Trump and Carson. And this is playing around the margins, because let's just go back and see in total how much these three establishment candidates together get in the first ballot choice, right? 18, and then Kasich is 25. So they're finding over 25% of their base. Meanwhile, half of it, almost, not quite, but enough of it, why are you chasing Rubio's 8%? Why are you chasing Kasich's 7%? Why are you not going after Trump's 24%? There is a lot more potential here to be picked up than down here in the 7% dregs, and this doesn't even have the margin of error, which at 400 people is probably around 5%, going 5.5% maybe. So, what are they focusing on here? I don't quite understand their strategy of basically only seeing other establishment candidates as being worth engaging with and taking on. So this information is more recent. It comes from the Bloomberg Des Moines Register poll that was conducted from the 16th to the 19th of October. And as you can see here, Ben Carson is just taking away the field, which we knew, and then Trump is over here. Now, this is interesting. This is very selective cherry picking of data, because I saw these numbers discussed on Morning Joe. And it probably wasn't, who was it? It was maybe Mark Halburn or John Heilman. Maybe, yeah, Donnie Deutsch. I can't remember who was on Morning Joe, but they mentioned this statistics. If you'll see on the right-hand side of the page, there is a question about, have you made up your mind? And they have the sample, could you still be persuaded? And then Carson supporters, and that you can see more than 80% of Carson supporters say, yeah, I could be persuaded to vote for somebody else. What this slide leaves out is, and this is what was mentioned on Morning Joe, if you look at that number for Donald Trump, 60% of people who say they're going to support Donald Trump they've made their mind up. That's it. They're not going to consider anyone else. So yeah, Carson's support, although right now on the rise, at least in Iowa, is quite soft. And I want to see how the debate numbers play out. But I think Cruz could start to make a bit of a play for some of Carson's supporters in Iowa. And we'll see how that goes. I don't want to get distracted on the Carson thing here. But again, this is cherry picking numbers to make it look like Jeb has a chance. But does anybody really think that Jeb has a chance to pick up Carson supporters? that you're high if you're thinking that that is a demographic you're going to go after. So I just don't see a way out of this for the Bush people. What I do see from these slides, and again, this is my opinion, reading the data and when watching this, that these people are being fed a line of shit. And there's a lot of cherry picking out there in order to make things look better than they are. Right, Jed's image is improving, and this goes to October, and these are his favorability ratings. Again, you can like someone or even rate them as saying, yeah, he's a nice guy, but that doesn't mean you're going to support him and vote for him. So while favorabilities are an important thing they're an important metric to take into account. Just because, again, you have a positive opinion of someone doesn't mean you're going to support them. You can think that Jeb Bush is a nice guy and you like the 2 Bush presidents, but it doesn't mean you're going to support him. Here they talk about national trends, and this ends again in sort of the middle part of October. Jeb is actually at 7% in the Real Clear Politics poll average that I saw most recently. So I don't really, it was Bush, they call him steady, but he's on a downward trajectory. And this is, again, interesting how they present this information. If you look at this slide, this is from September 4th through October 17th. Which is a very short amount of time. And also, I think this was when they were spending quite a lot of money, at least in New Hampshire. If you go back to July, Bush's number is 17%. So if you were to look at that trend for longer than 6 weeks, it would be obvious that Jeb Bush is basically like running face first into a big fat zero. He's just going on a downward slide with a little bit of a bump, I think, in New Hampshire after they dumped millions and millions of dollars in advertising. So let me see, this is a CNN ORC conducted interviews, although I'm not entirely sure. They've got, the dates here are the 14th through the 17th and 465 interviews. They don't give any margin of error, and they don't say, I assume that this is the same question asked at 3 points in time, but they're not entirely transparent with their data sources here. So again, I'm just flagging that up. They might have talked about this and where this information comes from, but they didn't put the earlier stuff in there. So I'm just going to assume that that's the same question asked at 3 different time points by CNN ORC. Now, here again is the bullshit warning. Meep, meep, meep. This is aggregation of 2012 polling and the story that the Bush people have been trying unsuccessfully to sell for weeks now is that we shouldn't pay any attention to the polls now because last time the polling was all over the place. That's kind of true. It's also kind of not true. So let's see if we can find Romney here in this slide. Right, so Romney, I hope you can see my little thing here, is the red line. And it looks like there's a lot of volatility, but really there's not. There's Romney and then someone else, and then Romney and then someone else, and then someone else, and then Romney. It was Romney versus the anti-Romney last time. People were casting around for something that was someone who was not an establishment candidate, but who could still be elected or at least, take down Romney. They couldn't find that person, so they settled on Romney at the end. That doesn't mean that this time around, people aren't picking their candidates earlier, and they're not settling on their candidates earlier. So I think it's very inappropriate, and it's bad modeling from a political science point of view to use 2012 as a way to evaluate and understand 2016. In my opinion, these are completely different races. They are not comparable in any meaningful way, fundamentally because the structures of the campaigns are different. Who was voting and the candidates on offer, the clown car in 2012, is completely different from Ben Carson, who people have been asking to run and encouraging to run, and Donald Trump, who is just able to suck up all the oxygen. So I don't think you can really, it's a mistake. And anyone who tries to tell you to take comfort in the 2016 polls by looking at the 2012 polls is full of shit. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, hi, la, 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 la. Same kind of nonsense. Right, this is internal data, so I don't even know where, who was asked this question, how many people were asked, any of that. I don't really trust this slide without that information. Now, at the discussion, they might have discussed this, they might have talked about if this was national, whatever else, but from my point of view as a political scientist looking at this magical internal data and not knowing anything about it, I can't really speak to its credibility. Now, what they're also trying to do in terms of calming their voters down is giving, again, this internal data asks people, what's your most important issue or problem when choosing a presidential candidate? And you've got national security, jobs and the economy, government spending and debt, erosion of traditional values, illegal immigration, and excessive regulation by the government. Yes, that's such a terrible thing. Everyone's 7% of people that think that's their #1 issue. Anyway, the thing here is they're asking about in terms of important issue, they're not necessarily asking about competence. Now, do they get, no, this is, I think that what this internal data then becomes is a push poll. And again, I don't know that because that's not what they put on the slides, but given the kinds of questions that you're going to see coming up, I think that's where it's going. So we got here. This is basically trying to give the impression that Bush is going to be seen as successful and a good candidate on a variety of these issues. But that, again, they're treating voters as if the election is a supermarket and there are all these different candidates with different qualities, and if you just tick the right boxes, they're going to pick you. And my contention is that the base right now is more interested in a fresh face and fresh ideas than competence. So let's see, we've got, they gave them, here's the question, which point of view is closest to your own about Jeb Bush? And here's, I'm sure that, I don't know if they flipped the order in which these questions are asked, I doubt it, but maybe they did. Here's the push in terms of the positive. We'll strengthen our military because he's been endorsed by 13 Medal of Honor recipients. What the hell does that have to do with anything? How can you, how do you correlate 13 Medal of Honor recipients, linking that into strengthening your military just because some people like you? All right, and then the other one was, unfortunately, relies upon the same core military and foreign policy advisors that his father and brother used, 33%. These are very leading questions. They kind of set people up for a particular answer or to put a memory in their mind, like endorsed by 13 Medal of Honor recipients. So again, I tend to find push polls very questionable. They're saying that Bush, again, has a top pick on the economy, but again, internal data, I don't know where this is coming from. I don't know when it was taken. It's kind of hard to say, so I'm going to move along. Message on spending, they claim that he has a message that works. If Jeb had a message that worked, he wouldn't be at 7% in the polls. So let's read this little narrative that they've got going just to hear how they're trying to frame these push polls. Jeb Bush has proposed a series of reforms to change the political culture in Washington, D.C., including calling for a balanced budget amendment, term limits, and 6-year lobbying ban for former lawmakers, and a new law that would cut congressmen and senators' paychecks when they skip votes or hearings. That's his little dig at Marco. Fine, that's like saying, yeah, I got a bill that calls for blue skies and apple pie and people being nice to each other. It doesn't mean that it's going to get through Congress. So again, this is just less of a way of actually measuring people's responses to a candidate and more of a way to plant ideas into the listener's head in order to shape how they perceive Jeb Bush. And so I'm going to leave this up here just for a few seconds. If you want to hit pause on the video, you can read all of these push statements where they're trying to increase Bush's favorability with people on the phone to test messages. And they're looking for the ones that seem to push people in his favor the most in order to shape their campaign message. The problem is, as I said, I don't think that the kind of message he is selling is one that anyone is buying. Changes impressions. So this is again why I think it's a push poll. They talk about where people were pre and then where they were post, and the messages that they that performed well. So you've got a line item veto, fought the teachers union, funded new women's shelters, helped to bring domestic violence crimes down by 27%. That's an interesting number. I wonder how they made that. Strongly pro-life and balanced the budgets. Yeah, these are all, like I said, in the focus groups, the video that I did a while ago, people are like, yeah, he seemed to have good policies, but nobody really wants him. The problem is the candidate. and the problem is the electorate. That's Jeb's problem. Right, now these are results from likely Iowa Republican caucus participants. We have to again remember that Ben Carson is now pulling out in front in Iowa. So I don't know why he's putting himself up against Trump, because Trump is coming in second. Now this data is from, I think, when Trump was still barely leading, October 14th to the 20th, but the momentum had shifted in Carson's favor. So, you know, I think the reason why, personally, the reason why they chose to highlight how Bush is performing vis-a-vis Trump in Iowa is because if they had done it in New Hampshire, Trump is at like 25 or 30%, and Bush is at, well, in the most recent polls I've seen, not in the ones in these slides, whereas Bush is at, 7%, 10%. And against Trump in New Hampshire, the data would look very different. So again, this is selectively pulling out where Trump is struggling and Carson is succeeding to make Bush look less shit. And it's deceptive. It's not completely transparent, in my opinion. Now, they obviously are aware of the fact that George Bush is a problem, and they want to make the claim that George Bush's favorability ratings are going up. Well, this little chart ends in May of 2015, and I think if you had extended this out and through September, where Jeb flubbed a lot of his GWB lines in terms of was it the right thing to go into Iraq, yada yada yada, that this number would look very different. I have a feeling that it's going to trend down again. So they kind of looks like they picked out the May 25th in order to make it look like he's, oh my gosh, he's on an upwards trajectory, and then left off the last several months. The Bush brand popular in Iowa and New Hampshire. Well, yes, and if you watched my video where it had focus group participants from both of those states, they are very fond of the Bush family, and some of them, said, I like the last two presidents. But that doesn't mean because they like the family brand, they are convinced that Jeb is the right candidate to be president in this cycle. So again, it's a related issue in terms of what they're presenting, what the Bush people are presenting to their donors. But they're presenting it in a way that obscures the fact that their candidate is shite. All right, so this was a big deal about how George kept us safe when he didn't, because we were attacked, and then he picked up the pieces. So we're going to go on. Electability consistently beat Hillary. These data are also from September, when Hillary was still in the middle of the email thing before her Benghazi performance, or not performance, but her being put in front of the committee for, was it 8 hours or 11 hours or something? And before her own debate performance. So again, this is rather a cherry picking exercise. It probably was, the only data that they had at the time. But on the other hand, there's going to be new data coming out that I think it's going to show Clinton in a much more powerful position against the Republicans, because she's actually seen an uptick in the positive news about her. She's taking charge of her political destiny rather than allowing events to define what's going on with her. So I don't tend to put a lot of stock into these nationwide registered voter matchups, because a real two fake candidates, you're doing hypotheticals and it's too far out. So it might give you a sense of how people are performing, but I think again is just a desperate attempt to find any data that makes Jeb look good. And they're going to, again, pretend that being better than Hillary matters at this point to GOP-based voters. And it doesn't. This is just to calm down the donors and give them something shiny and happy to look at, rather than looking at the flaming, burning disaster that is the on-the-ground situation in Iowa and South Carolina and Florida. And I think Nevada, too. Right. This is really, really, really super difficult to read. So let me tell you, this top line here is Jeb Bush's PAC. It's the right to rise and how much spending it's done. And this is pretty small even for me. So let me see if I can zoom this in a bit. That looks like, I don't know, like 9 million? I don't know. Well, they're just looking at how much people are spending. And it's kind of like look how big my bankroll is, as if in this race it matters. And while money is vital, it's like oxygen, you need money to survive. It is not decisive. Money by itself cannot win you the race. So as much as it looks like, wow, he's got I need dollars. Jeb Bush, he's actually his money isn't going to help him. There are some slides here that I don't quite understand. Again, this is probably some insider stuff. I'm not sure what GRPs by state are. This is tactical stuff that I haven't had a chance to. Yeah, I don't work in that world, so I won't try to interpret that. And then they go through and highlight the various advertising that has been done on behalf of Jeb to talk about, yeah, we've got all of these great ads that can get us from 17 to 14, but then it goes right back down to 7 again. And again, talking with looking at the issues that he does well on. In terms of, yeah, we've got future total spending, and look at this number. This is how much, and I know that technically this isn't collusion, they're just reporting, but this is how much the Right to Rise is planning on spending, total future spending, and that looks like they're planning on right now around 33 million in total media spending. And they predict that the Marco Rubio people will be spending about half that amount. So there you go. That's Jeb Bush's whole, basically, this is the core of his campaign right now. This is everything that, if anything is going to save him, it's going to have to be Right to Rise because he's drowning. More media stuff. Looks like they've got some tactical things. So here's the spending by Right to Rise by state. And if it's hard to read, I'll zoom it in again. We've got on the top side here, Iowa, then New Hampshire, South Carolina, and then nationally. And you know, Jeb Bush can't perform embarrassingly in Iowa. I think he's going to anyway, but they're still going to dump 7 million there. Then Jeb is actually going to spend another $1 million of his own money there as well. Whereas New Hampshire, and this is something that has been kind of bebopping around, New Hampshire does need to be the place where Jeb wins. If he can't win New Hampshire, if he stays in the race that long, but if he can't win New Hampshire, he is done, 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 done. So looks like they've got budgeted almost 18 million. Bush has another 4.4, 4.5. So they're really desperate to win in New Hampshire, and they should be, because if they don't, as I said, they'll be done. They're also looking to be competitive, at least not embarrass themselves in South Carolina, and they're looking at almost 7.8 million and 2.3 in terms of paid media in those markets as well. Right, so if you're wondering how Bush was gonna do his February primary media plan, here it is. They have purchased, looks like they've got a $10.8 million plan in terms of gross points purchased. I think that's how the term works. I never actually bought ads, so, but I think that's right. They're looking at 5.6 million in New Hampshire. Now this must be let me just go back to see if this makes any sense compared to what they've just said. Oh, that's not zooming, that's going back. So looking at Jeb in New Hampshire, we're only in February anyway. Anyway, moving on here. Sorry, they've got planned to buy or have reserved a ton of media in markets in the relevant places, and they're ready to go. Basically, they're saying, you know, we've got a plan for February, again, if they make it that long. I have no idea what this is because I can't interact with it, but presumably it was the little video that they showed. This is probably another little video, a commercial, or potentially an ad. This is yet more media. We don't get to see all of these because they're not interactive, but that's okay because, they might never get made because Bush might not be around for the early state primaries. This talks about their infrastructure, and as I said before, in terms of machinery, Jeb is fine on machinery. The question is his machinery so expensive that it eats up all his money? And that is the problem he recently had to deal with by cutting back his staff. So here he lays out where he's putting his resources. Honestly, I would probably put more in New Hampshire myself, and I would shift most of these people from Iowa over to New Hampshire because that's where you need it. Same thing with South Carolina. It's a lost cause. Donald Trump just dominates there. And if he wants to plant his flag somewhere, it's going to have to be New Hampshire. So I'm second guessing this, and there are people who make a lot of money giving this kind of advice, but this is certainly, this sort of even distribution of resources, this is what you do when you're Hillary Clinton right now. I think right now Bush is still not taking seriously enough how desperate he needs to get ahead in one state, at least be viable in a single state, because right now he is not viable anywhere, and he can't wait for other people to mess up in order for him to take this race. If he can't control his own destiny, then he's not going to be president. There are a lot of things here with very, very small type that I'm not going to go over, mostly because I don't really know what they're on about. I think that, so these are, I'm talking about events and things that are happening in the various states. This is Nevada events, and there are numbers and charts and colors, and I'm just going to move on this. All right, let's, I'm into the 60s now, by the way. You can see how, I can't even imagine how long all of these together would have been to analyze. But moving on here, oh, this is that they're looking at Iowa, right? So it doesn't say on the slide anywhere, but it's caucus votes and the winner was Santorum. So clearly they're talking about Iowa. I just had to read the text a little bit and get my orientation. And they said here, you can see that Santorum won with just under 30,000 votes, and Romney came second, almost again with 30,000 votes, whereas Huckabee got 40,000. So they're looking at how many people do we need to get to the caucuses to win? How many people physically do we need to have in those places voting for us to guarantee a win? And in terms of the total registered Republicans in the state, that's the total number, somewhere over 600,000. And they are looking here at their state organization. So let's say that past his prologue and Jeb needs anywhere between, let's call it 30 and 40,000 to win Iowa. Because I know that they talked about this in a later slide, which is, it's relevant. Here's the Iowa landscape. And this information, yeah, Jeb sucks ass in Iowa. He just is underneath everybody. He's coming in, oh, look at that, that's him here. So you got Trump, Carson, Fiorina, Cruz, Rubio, and then Bush, and then next to him is Huckabee and Jindal. Oh, why did you guys even put this slide up? Just focus on New Hampshire. All right, so this is where they want to get their statewide totals, and they're aiming for, it looks like, 23,000 people, although that seems to me short, but this is their plan. I'm not going to go into all these details because they have these numbers and I'm just seeing their summary numbers, but they have a goal of trying to get to, you know, obviously I would say between 30 and 40,000 supporters in the caucuses if they want to win, which they're not going to. Currently, statewide, they've ID'd under 1,500. They need 30,000. They've ID'd 1,500. Now, that might be a lot because I can't compare that with other campaigns because I don't have their detailed donor, slides to go over. But that just seems really super bad to me, considering how much activity and time and attention it's going on in Iowa, because people there do make up their minds. You know, they're highly engaged, and they've only found 1,200 supporters statewide, and their goal is 23,000, which again to me seems, well, maybe they're figuring out in terms of 100% of the voters they're going to need a smaller portion of the pie. Either that, or they're just desperately trying to come in third. Maybe that's it. Maybe they're hoping Carson will come in first, Trump will come in second, or maybe Cruz will come in second, and Jeb can aim for third. That would be reasonable. If this whole thing is just trying to get Jeb into third place, then I would probably go with that. If this is their winning strategy, I think you're wasting your time. Right? So then they're going to talk about how many people they've contacted and tracked. And another problem that I see with the way the Republicans are running this race is one of the things that they really, really envied Obama about last time was his ability to connect with people, micro-target, and turn out voters. What the GOP seems to be doing is taking all of the digital side of that and ignoring all the human side of it. And let me illustrate that. Jeb and all the other establishment candidates spent more time traveling the countries in small rooms with rich people to give them money rather than spending time with voters, because they just assume that if they put down a candidate, people will vote for whatever is put in front of them. And what happened while the establishment was doing that was the outsider candidates like Carson and other ones are building up connections or making more of a connection with those voters than the establishment has. So I think there's a real problem with the GOP's get out the vote plan in that it overly relies on technology without making the connection to the human beings behind that technology. I also don't know that a lot of their base is suitable for a lot of tech-based GOTV, but in terms of like them being older people and reaching out to Fox viewers, that type, but I'm getting a little bit off topic. Endorsements well, I'm sure that there are groups who will give money, but again, in an anti-establishment year, this is nothing. This really does not have the kind of impact. Well, endorsements generally don't. I mean, endorsements are good because then maybe you can get people to give you money, and that's what Bush needs. But nobody cares that a bunch of establishment types are supporting another establishment insider Washington type, and that's not where the GOP base is right now. Then they've got a whole bunch of engagement efforts, trying desperately to reach out to people who don't like them. Well, maybe some of them like them. Ballot access, this goes down to the machinery part of the campaign, and clearly if you're going to be a national campaign, you do need a strategy on ballot access. In some ways, I just think they've been so focused on ballot access in the future that they might have tripped themselves up in the primary, where all of this work will have been for naught because he's not going to make it. So this obviously is a good thing to do. You have to do this as a national campaign, and you need to get out volunteers to collect signatures to get your candidate's name on the ballot. You also can use that to recruit people, bring them in to support the campaign. It's a way to connect again with human beings, the one thing that they're not doing. So this is all very fine. What is this talking about? I don't know what this is, so we're going to move on. Weighting is dynamic, so as the primary season progresses, predicted performance weights become more important. Let's see, we've got structural election rules. Here it says primary caucus open closed, allocation methods, threshold, and WT options. So this is all campaign strategy or organization. This is all machinery kind of stuff. Calendar, the date, the information. I guess this probably makes sense in the talk, but we're going to just move on. Data and analytics. This was what I was pointing to earlier in this focus on technology instead of focusing on people. And they're saying the data is being used to provide detailed micro-targeting profiles of voters. We know exactly which Republicans are the most likely to vote and what issues matter to them. We're running thousands of simulated election days using the data we've collected in order to game out different scenarios and better allocate resources. But what they aren't doing is, connecting with human beings. They're not listening to the focus group respondents and why they don't like Jeb. And they're not dealing, I think, again, with the fundamental problems the candidate has. And it's a candidate problem. So all the data and analytics in the world isn't going to help that. They're advertising the most sophisticated voter analytics effort ever, which again is great if you've got people to vote for you. Then you do need voter scoring and micro-targeting. You do need direct contact. You do need poll sampling management. But if nobody supports you, all of this stuff is pointless. Pointless. I don't know what this is, so I'm just going to move on, move on, move on, move on. We're at 89 now of 112. Here's some stuff on their marketing. Their micro-targeting data and information that I'm sure was discussed at length. Ooh, this looks more like a political science conference now. We're getting some and voters and the predicted probability of voting and the state-of-the-art polling sample. Ooh, I don't know what this is because it's a secret, I'm sure. Or at least the stuff that they talked about in their meetings. They probably didn't put enough out there for me to interpret it. Looks like this is some kind of campaign simulation that they're trying to work out with low turnout victories and high turnout victories and looking at demographics and the percentage Jeb ballot lead. You have to lead, don't you, first? But yeah, they're kind of getting ahead a little, maybe a little bit ahead of themselves, but if they do well, then I guess it will all have been worth it. Some advanced TV tracking stuff that I don't know about, and these are slides I can't interpret sort of just on the fly if I spent a lot of time, but I'm not going to do that. And they're again focused on buying media and trying to change people's mind about their very lousy candidate. Google search traffic, the 16th of September debate. There is, I should say, an emerging field in political science that looks at the relationship between social media activity and internet activity and campaigns. And it's very early in its sort of development because we haven't had social media long enough to have enough campaigns to get a good sense. And so I tend to be, I mean, I always take it on information about digital tracking and analytics, but here, let me just put it this way. When Clinton and Sanders debated, what the polling afterwards found was that people thought that Clinton did well in the debate and won the debate. On the other side, you had a lot of digital activity around Bernie Sanders. So you had Google searches about him, and you had people who got excited about him and gave him money. And there were some focus groups where people were saying nice things about Bernie Sanders. For me, those are all fine in terms of pieces of information. But when you have a polling sample that has shown Clinton to be ahead, then the rest of it kind of doesn't matter. There's a truism in politics is that yard signs don't vote, people do. It doesn't matter if the candidate that you're supporting has 10 times the number of yard signs in your area. That doesn't necessarily mean he or she is going to get 10 times the number of votes. People put up signs in their yards for lots of reasons. Maybe somebody paid them. Maybe they're doing it as a favor to a friend. So you can't measure voter support by just signage. And I feel that's the same way with Bernie Sanders. Yeah, he might have gotten more donations that night. He might have gotten a lot more Google searches. That doesn't mean he won the debate. Doesn't mean that he improved his standing vis-a-vis Clinton. The polls showed that Clinton did it better. So, this kind of stuff, digital tracking and analytics, whenever it makes your candidate look good, I'm sure it's useful to put it out there, but I would be more skeptical. I would look at more rigorous studies about the use of social media, Twitter in particular, and how candidates perform vis-a-vis the number of people who are tweeting about them on Twitter. But obviously, you've got here a real concern with the Bush people to monitor the stuff. Now, what I'm looking at in this little cloud bubble here, share of voice. Here's Bush, here's Ted Cruz, here's Fiorina, here's Ben Carson, where's Donald Trump? You notice that he's not in this schema at all. And you can't tell me in terms of social media monitoring that Donald Trump doesn't show up somewhere in here. Right, so they're also moving to digital advertising, not only television, right, so that you can get it through YouTube as well. And digital fundraising tools. If they had anybody to give them money, this would be really helpful. And this is what Bush desperately, desperately, desperately needs. The $25, $50, $100 donors. He's got billionaires and millionaires writing him checks, but he can't spend that money to keep his doors open. What he does not have, and what he is basically like suffocating from a lack of, are these small donors who give small amounts. We're not reaching their peak. You can go back to them again and again. Oh gosh, here's a terrible way to think about it. A vampire who has a person who is willing to let them come and just take a little bit of blood out of them every couple of months, right? So it's not that big of a deal to them. Maybe $25, might be $50. Doesn't really hurt their bottom line, and they can do it over and over again. Jeb Bush, like a vampire, needs about 150,000 of those people to just sign up and then infrequently give him money. And that's going to be interesting to see whether or not his campaign can focus on small donor recruitment or if they're unsuccessful. So we're getting near the end. We're into the communications part of it now. We're on slide 99 of 120. And I'm going to just go over this really quickly, but I don't know that there's much in here because, let me see. Oh, yes. Right. So these are the things that they want to focus on in order to make Jeb Bush successful. And again, I think they're just missing the point. A plan to fix DC, that he cares about people like me, and he's a strong leader. I don't know that the Tea Party base wants DC fixed. And I don't think they care about having a candidate who is like them so much as they want a strong leader. So again, I mean, they can give these attributes and say, yes, Jeb has all of these, but the fact is other people have them more and better. So Washington reform, he's got, again, a bunch of, Wall Street Journal papers and inside politics stuff, and basically selling the donors this idea that Jeb has got a message that connects with people, and I just don't see it. He's getting out there more, not that it's helping. He's doing local media, again, not that it's helping. Oh, he went on Jimmy Fallon, that's fun. He's going to niche audiences. They're doing digital content and tagging their sites to provide deep insights into what audiences consume and providing them with thousands of data points on site visitors. So if you go to his website, just know that they're going to stalk you digitally, or not stalk you, but at least they're going to grab everything they can about you and try to put you on their mailing list. And this is really, look at this bit here. During the debates, we're nimble and combine our top quality video and graphics content with our advertising efforts, pairing ads to the audiences that will be most likely to be moved by them rapidly and effectively. During the debates, Jeb Bush was not nimble, and he was not quick on his feet. All right, then we have some social media stuff. Oh, look, Jeb is cool, no filter, Sharknado 3, no idea what that is. And then they have a Q&A session and some national finance updates that they didn't put on the screen, which is probably a better idea. And that's it. So had you donated $150,000, that is what you would be enjoying. So let's see if we can get, stop. All right, that should be me again. Right, so that was a lot to cover, a lot of things to process, and I think some really interesting insights. I do think that there's a real disconnect in Bush world from real life campaigning, and we'll just see if he can adjust. They seem to not have learned very much from what they've done before. We'll see if that remains, or if he radically transforms his message and becomes the kind of candidate that the base wants, instead of trying to get the base to accept him for who he is. Right, that was a lot of talking, and I'm sorry for the length of the video, but with 112 slides, there's just really nothing I can do. It sort of is what it is. So patriarchy video out tomorrow. I have a Get Smarter hanging about that I need to get out, but Get Smarter is going to get wrapped up into Facepalm Moments of the Week. It's going to stop being its own show, just because I can't, like, it's just too much time to record it separately and process it separately. And I guess that is about it. If you're interested in this and want to talk about it more, I'm going to be having my Patreon hangout tomorrow, so you guys can join me for that, and we can talk about these numbers and these issues. Otherwise, I'm going to stop talking because I've been doing it for a long time now. My voice is getting a little bit tired. So I've been Christy. You've been awesome. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of this video. Hardcore nerd. I'll see you guys later.